Hi, everybody. Welcome to Thought Leadership Thursday. And my guest today is Dr. Sarah Corwin from MGP Ingredients. And MGP are like leading starch specialists. And so we got a lot of interesting things to chat about with you here today. And I had the very good fortune of meeting Dr. Corwin at a conference a number of years ago where she participated in a competition, and I got to sample some of her handiwork back then. So welcome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So I thank you for coming on, because I think that starches and modified starches in particular are often a bit of a mystery to bakers. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of help give us some ideas and walk us through on some of the more appropriate and practical uses. Perhaps if we can kind of start with a little bit of an introduction on how to utilize the different types of modified starches.
Definitely. Well, I think that first we should talk about what are the different types of modified starches.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's, you think of starch is native or raw wheat starch, and that's unmodified. And then there's a pretty simple modification that's just heat and moisture. That would be gelatinization, or if you think about just, when you make a slurry and you cook that and it thickens up, that's gelatinization. So that's just heat modified. So pretty simple. Mm-hmm. The other kinds of modification include acid or base modification, oxidation, cross-linking, substitution, enzyme modified. There's any combination of those as well. So quite a number of different ways that we can modify starch.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of how you look at some of the utilization in terms of understanding the needs, you're looking at amylographs for viscosity and pasting and rheology and things like that. What type of certification, when somebody looks at a C of A, what type of information are they going to see on that?
Definitely. So, yep, of course, viscosity and rheological information. So, how does that starch absorb water? How does it gel? How does that gel hold? So is there syneresis or weeping out of that gel? What's the freeze-thaw stability? Does it affect maybe staling or retrogradation? So all of those different...
Staling and retrogradation, that's a big one these days. We get a lot of questions and things on that. When we look to use things like that, so when somebody is looking to let's take starch retrogradation and look to I'd like to improve my bread and I want to reduce staling. Is modified starch something that they can look to, and what is the basis of criteria that they should use to select the right type of starch for that?
For staling, actually, protein, I think, is probably a better approach for that. However, the impact on texture long-term of starch modification could include increased crispiness, for example. So that would be oxidized starch.
Oxidized starch, so something that more, and it'll have an effect on the crust in terms of crispiness, but less so on the retrogradation of the starch. But is that something that is good at trapping moisture or water binding or anything like that?
Right, so oxidized starch actually decreases water binding. By oxidized starch, there's less water bound. So in turn, that means that the starch does not have as much water to retrograde with, if that makes sense.
So that can be beneficial in that respect. So sometimes I guess where I'm going with this is sometimes the process where the baker is thinking, I want to keep more water in it to stop it from drying out, that is actually not what is causing the staling. The staling is the recrystallization of the starch, which gives you that stale, firm texture on the interior crumb. So reducing some of the water binding is actually more beneficial to slowing starch retrogradation. Would that be correct?
I think so. If you have a lower amount of bound water, then you are not going to have as much available. Your end product will already be firmer, and a lot of the textural change will not have occurred. Will have already occurred, so there will not be as much room for staling or textural change
to go further. Yeah,
yes.
Excellent. Yeah, really cool. Okay, this is very good. I'm learning from this as well as we go along, which is kind of the point. One of the ones that we see a lot, at least I'm very familiar with in bakers and cooks even producing themselves, but we see often well utilized for different pastry applications and things, as you mentioned at the beginning, gelatinized starch. So starches that have been pre-gelatinized, so they swell very easily in terms of when you add moisture to it and things like that, and they provide somewhat different functionality than in the baking process. The one as a pastry chef that comes to mind for me is a pâte à choux, like a cream puff type of thing, or even as has become very popular in recent years is the Latin American churros and these types of things. So so is there anything else other than heat modification that should be looked at for that type of a starch application? Or is just the pre-gelatinization all we really want to be concerned with on something like that?
For application and textural modification?
Yes, for things like roux-based types of doughs that are then baked.
So
like
actually, right? MGP has an oxidized starch. We call it mid-cell crisp. And that we've shown in choux doughs, but also in cereal, in crackers, in crispy cookies as well. That really increases the crispiness. And that's, the lowered gelatinization temperature. So gelatinization occurs more quickly earlier on in the cooking process, but also has a lower water binding capacity. So it will have less water bound in the finished product. And that definitely has improved crispiness in churros and choux doughs.
Okay, but that wouldn't be for an instant process though then, in terms of you would still need to cook the wheat flour for something like that.
Right, yes, so pre-gel, for example, crullers.
Yes.
The donuts, right. So a pre-gelatinized starch is great for that, for crullers. There's a really tight, you can have very tight control of the viscosity of the batter there, which is really great when you're trying to extrude it directly into the oil.
Yeah, and so would it make sense to utilize some of the oxidation modified starch together with the pre-gel starch to get a crispiness as well as get that other instant functionality, or does it still need to go through a heat process before the going into the oven?
You're asking, does the oxidized starch need to be gelatinized in order to have that crispiness functionality?
Yes. Does it need to be pre-gelatinized in the pre-cooking process? So when a cruller is made from scratch, it's cooked on a stove first.
You know what? I actually don't know. That would be a great question for our technical specialists.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Yeah, they, we have technical specialists here that work really closely with applications. So they would be really, really good to answer.
Okay, so that's more deeper into the application side of things. Okay, yeah, and so I'm just sort of thinking, if I wanted to make an instant, like you said, like a donut cruller, which is like an instant choux, could I make it crispier by then combining it with the oxidized modified starch as well, to kind of get the benefits of both the instant application as well as getting that nice crispy crust, like you would have in a churro or things like that. That's really cool. And yeah, so we talked that that mentions the pre-gel and the midsole, and now one that I'm really curious about, and we had a chance to chat a little bit about this before, and it's something that is, I think, very trendy right now. With there's a lot of focus on nutrition and diets, and things like keto and all these types of things, and that's your product, your FiberSim, which is a phosphorylated modification. So tell us some more about FiberSim.
Definitely. So as you said, FiberSim, we also have FiberRite. Both of those starches are wheat starches that are phosphorylated. So there is cross-linking that occurs, and basically what if you think about gelatinized wheat starch, that starch granule starts to break apart. So with a phosphorylated starch, there's cross-linking, and that starch granule, that sphere, that's a crystalline structure, it really stays intact. So the digestive enzymes cannot penetrate. And also the water, if it's in a heat moisture environment, then water cannot penetrate that crystalline structure. And so the starch, for the most part, cannot be gelatinized. So it can't be even broken down for digestion. So really it's a unique starch because it functions just like regular wheat starch in baked goods up to even 50%. And past that, we can start to talk about adding back some protein if you're replacing a flour, but really a very cool product that is incredibly high fiber.
And yes, so that brings to the point that, as you mentioned, it resists being broken down in digestion. So this is one that people will often hear in terms of a resistant starch, and the resistance is this dietary resistance. And in the case of FiberSim, it also qualifies as dietary fiber. So it's very high in fiber. So you get the benefits of the starch functionality in making your batter, your dough, or things like that. And then in addition to that, you have the dietary benefits from the resistant starch that you're adding much more fiber to the product as well. And well, now I'm retired, so Lord knows, old people, we all need fiber, right?
Everybody needs fiber.
Yeah, yes, and it's and it's I joke a little bit, but the thing is, it is a great tool for developers, because some of the difficulty or the challenge in getting the fiber up for people to enjoy the product and get the dietary fiber they need is keeping those textures there and keeping it tasting right. So people are not as accommodating, in, I guess is maybe a backwards way of saying it, in specialty diets as it maybe 20 years ago, where we were willing to eat cardboard and things. I remember talking with some developers from Nabisco once, who created one of the early low-fat crackers and things. And amongst the development team, they called them rocks in a box, right? And because that's it met the needs of the nutritional profile, but they really weren't very enjoyable. And these types of products like FiberSim are making it much easier for developers to work with a starch product and also get the dietary fiber into the product then as well, and make something that is not only good for you, but actually still tastes good too.
Definitely. It has those grainy notes still, because it is a wheat product.
Yeah, and it's FiberSim, it's 99 or 98% fiber, was it something like that?
Yes, so the COA, I think that we say between 97 and 99.
Yeah, so think about keto diet. So there you go. It's basically you take credit for all that fiber now, and so it reduces your carbohydrate intake automatically. It's no longer like if you were using a native starch that would be 100% carbs. And so it's very, very useful tool in that way, right, as well, right? That's cool. Excellent. Yeah, and you mentioned the FiberRite as well.
Yep.
Anything I didn't bring up that that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to maybe? Is there anything I left out, or
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You brought up fiber right again. I think it's interesting to tie that back into the pre-gelatinized starches, because fiberite is a phosphorylated starch, so it is very, very high fiber, but it's also gelatinized. So very different functionality from what you would think of from a wheat starch that's just a regular wheat starch. It has the same behavior as a pre-gelatinized wheat starch. So, fat replacement, gelling, emulsification, thickening, very different properties from what you might think of for FiberSim, whereas FiberSim can't swell because of that modification.
I see. Excellent. That's interesting. And we have this chart. If you don't mind, I'd like to share this chart that we talked about a bit once. And this is sort of a great sort of summarizing reference tool for the various different modifications. So is that up now? It's still backstage, Ashuni. There we go. It's live. All right. So here we could see what we've been talking about, where like we've talked about oxidation quite a bit, where we could see that the gelatinization temperature is lowered, viscosity is lowered, water binding capacity is lowered, but it is very high in clarity, and it has effects on textural properties as well, which you mentioned the crisping is one of the examples, right? And here's a combination of cross-linking and substitution, and there can be any variety of these different modifications in that sense, but it's usually not much more than two. Is that correct, or are sometimes more than two modifications used as well?
Typically in today's market, you don't really see too much more than two, and I think that is, just cost prohibitory modification. You have to pay for the electricity and the power and the water, etc. So
yeah, absolutely. And so in your research, you still continue to study some of these different effects of combining and the different ratios and things like that?
Definitely, how that modifies nutrition, how that affects applications, all the way, yeah. What can we do with it? How does it affect the starch, structure, digestion, all of that? Yes.
Super. And you mentioned earlier about the applications people you have, and of course yourself and your group. So in terms of working with customers, it seems to me that you also provide a lot of support in these areas in helping your customers, your bakers and stuff, on choosing what is going to be the best type of modification to apply, and that out of your toolbox that you have available to them. And what types of things do you look for in when a baker says, well, I think I need modified starch to improve the shelf life on my cake? And so what kind of information are you going to look for the baker to help share with you, short of the full formula and things like that, in terms of helping to understand the criteria and the best selection of starch modification? Can you share with me some input on that, how you view that?
Definitely. So maybe a better example would be how can we increase the fiber, or how can we increase crispiness? So from there, we have specific ingredients in our portfolio that we know do those things. We've studied the applications. And you can, on this chart, it's very clear, if you're looking for example, increased crispiness, probably want to look at cross-linking or oxidation or hydrolyzed modification, or even a combination of any of those. So oxidized starch, I think, is probably going to provide the crispiest from what we know right now, with the smallest contribution, for example.
Excellent. Very cool. Oh, I stopped sharing, Ashuni, sorry. I'm still a little bit new at this, so thank you for your patience and everything. I usually have somebody like Dr. Lin running the show on me, so I'm getting my feet wet with this a little bit. I really appreciate your time, Dr. Corwin. It's been very informative. So I'd like to urge, of course, our bakers who are listening to all of your starch needs, please do give MGP a call. They're very, as you can see, they're very knowledgeable, very helpful. And I always encourage bakers and everybody to utilize your suppliers. They are a wealth of information. They just want to help you. I mean, it's really, they really sincerely do, because how else are they going to gain your trust and your business? And so, if there's anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Corwin, please feel free.
No, thank you so much, Mark. Yeah, it was great to catch up with you.
Excellent. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I look forward to hopefully seeing you again when we can start to do some in-person conferences again once in a while. So maybe we'll bump into each other at one of the other shows out there.
Yes.
All right. Thanks very much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And that is your leadership thoughts for this Thursday. Bye for now.